Greetings, YouTubers. I'm Nerdiac.
And I am his sidekick, Snarky Girl. And this is our first YouTube video where we decided we're a couple. We have been together 5 years,
Yes, in excess. It seems shorter because it's so sweet.
and we have a child together. So we decided it would be kind of fun to debate certain subjects that we don't necessarily agree with.
I didn't want to debate. I wanted to hype science stuff.
We can hype science stuff too, but these people don't want to hear about the science stuff.
So, what are we going to debate?
I think we should debate Christianity as opposed to atheism, of which I am a Christian, and you
I am
are.
not.
He is not. I don't know if I would call him an atheist. Would you call yourself an atheist?
I would not.
A skeptic, perhaps?
A skeptic.
Mm. So that's what we're going to debate. Um, Well, obviously, as I said, I'm a Christian, so I believe in God and the all-powerful being, and Jesus came down and died for our sins and all that good stuff, and you don't.
Well, there's no good historical evidence for Jesus or any of the four founders in the Bible, but I largely find that irrelevant to the debate.
How so?
Well, ultimately, if you ask the question, which of the two competing doctrines, and by the way, just for the record, I don't necessarily feel that scientific thought and religious thought must be in conflict, but under the circumstances of a debate, let's just say that if we were going to put them at opposing ends of the spectrum, which system of thought has done the world more good? I think unconditionally the scientific method and the scientific uh, state of mind has brought much more benefit to mankind than religion ever did.
Well, perhaps, but that would be more because of the fact that people influence religion, whereas science influences science. So, in other words, if one was to take the teachings of the Bible and was to actually practice them correctly, then that wouldn't necessarily be the case. The Bible is more, and we're not talking Old Testament, we're talking more of the New Testament doctrine. If one was to follow that, then we know that they would be leading a life which would be based on kindness and generosity and taking care of other people, and quite frankly, hanging out with people that, if you look at people throughout the Bible, you'll find that God and even Jesus himself was renowned for picking unlikely candidates, people of which others would find undesirable. And so the message would be, to kind of not be so much into the hierarchy. So if one was to actually follow the doctrine of the Bible, then I believe that would be not necessarily the case. But unfortunately, because we are people, and since we are people, we actually do poorly a lot, then that might actually be the case. But the fact would be whether you believe that it's true or not, and you say that there is no um, documentation, but is it not true that the Romans actually documented that? And we know that there's a Pontius Pilate, of which is somebody who was in the Bible. We know that he was under Caesar. We know that there was a Jesus that was crucified. That's actually in the Roman records. So we know all of those things. So, you know, I don't know that you can necessarily say that there is no such thing as Jesus, whether you want to say that he is the Son of God or not is something entirely different. But to say that historically he did not exist, I don't know if that's necessarily valid.
Well, am not commenting on whether he existed or not. Only that there's no real evidence that he did. And in any event, it's irrelevant. You might argue that yes, there are historical references to Jesus, and then I might argue back that, well, guess who was in charge of the historical record for 400, 500 years? That would be Christian monks, who are the only reason that we have any records from that time. They worked diligently and painstakingly to preserve the information, but maybe once in a while they snuck in a passage that wasn't necessarily there. For me, though, you can debate these things about religion all day long. And that's sort of the point I want to make. Philosophically, there's a fundamental difference between religious thought and scientific, or skeptical, if you will, thought. And it is simply this. Religion ultimately derives from divine revelation. I was there, I saw it. That's why it's so easy to debate, well, did this happen or did it not happen? Now, you were making a comment that religion suffers from its followers. In other words, if there were a pure version of Christianity out there somewhere, a nation, say, in which everyone was a pious and, you might think back to the Arthurian knights. Here are these guys who are all pious Christians and all conduct themselves with Christian virtue and with the things they're supposed to have. This is an ideal utopian society. But we, discover when you look into King Arthur that it was not an ideal or utopian society, because people's failings bring down these high ideals. Science suffers from the same problems. I might misquote here. I think it may have been Heisenberg, one of those, turn-of-the-century physics guys who said, science advances one funeral at a time. And what he meant by that was that scientists can be prejudiced and bigoted and make mistakes the same as, say, priests or religious people can. The difference is that science is self-correcting. It doesn't depend on divine revelation, but rather empirical evidence. So if you can come along 20 years later and show good empirical evidence why the guy before you was wrong, then his idea is thrown out, corrected. Whereas for religion, to me, from my perspective, it often seems like you look back to these forefathers, and their word is law. You can't debate what Moses had to say or what Jesus had to say, even if you have newer and better evidence with which to combat what might be seen as erroneous ideas, because religion looks backwards and science looks forwards.
But didn't you just say that science, in fact, suffers from the same?
Oh yes,
yes,
very much so.
So then by that virtue, by that statement, then how can you necessarily say that one is better than the other? And I say that as somebody that, even though I actually am a Christian, I am actually very science-minded too. I mean, not like nerd face over here necessarily, right? But I am very, scientifically minded and very interested in that kind of thing. So, I'm not disparaging science at all, which I do actually find that there are some fundamentalist Christians that actually do, and I find that bizarre. But
probably very few.
Very few, yeah. But nevertheless, I guess my point is, how can you necessarily say that one has been so much better for mankind? I mean, are we talking about the fact of science has promoted longevity of people? Are we talking about that, or is that what we're speaking of? Because it falls to the same error because of humans. I mean, the world was flat, right? I
think that's largely a historical myth. Most educated people, even back in Greek times, knew that the world was round.
Well, but there were definitely scientists that did think that, right? They thought that.
There were some, but to be sure. There's some people that think that now. There's a flat Earth society, I believe, in Britain.
Well, is there not? And let's just talk about. I was talking to another friend about this the other day. Edison and Tesla, right?
Right. Okay.
Okay. So Edison, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure you will because you love to correct me.
It's my passion.
Edison was kind of a jerk. I mean, he really was a big old meanie-faced jerk, and he did not like Tesla Because Tesla promoted, was it AC/DC?
That's right. Tesla
Yes.
promoted AC,
Mhm.
whereas Edison was stuck in DC.
Right. So he actually went to the point of trying to disparage Tesla, and in fact, he electrocuted an elephant.
Yes, among other things.
Yes, I mean, like, if you watch
Horses,
this,
I believe.
right, if you watch this after you're done, go look that up and you'll find they actually have video of him literally electrocuting an elephant because he's such a jerk. So,
I don't know if it was Edison personally, that was
well,
throwing the switch, but he
right,
was behind it,
he was
yes.
behind it to disprove, to show how dangerous Tesla's, right,
Yes.
Tesla's technology
Because of
was.
the much increased voltage.
Right, is in his, and did it actually backfire, or did he, because of what he did, he actually stopped Tesla from his things from promoting as much? Yes, and he actually caused Tesla to not be as popular or as well known as him. Correct? Is this correct? I mean, if you think about it, I mean, we
I
know
think Tesla
Tesla.
kind of did that to himself.
How so?
Well, he was known as an eccentric and kind of an odd guy. And of
Those
course,
odd guys. I
I
mean,
know, and they have it the hardest. And
that's awesome.
famously, he ended up in a hotel in New York City feeding pigeons, one of which he fell in love with and thought was going to fly away in a beam of. I'm serious. I am not making this up at all. And so I think he might have had some mental problems later in life. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure Edison would have loved to besmirch him, but I don't know that he was very successful. I mean, obviously Tesla won out, and Westinghouse won out with the AC current. I mean, DC was just so much inferior to AC that they had the far superior product.
But you're saying that his attitude, that Edison's attitude, did not cause any kind of discord or ripple effect, of which actually brought science back, as opposed to bringing it forward.
Well, I don't really think Edison was a scientist in that sense. He was. It was
Well,
interesting.
it is
It's interesting.
science.
He
It's
was.
technology. I mean, it is definitely a scientific-minded kind of endeavor for sure.
I mean,
I mean,
Edison had, and this is debate, and I am not an expert on this. I should qualify here, but
he is not an expert on
but
this. He should
Edison
qualify that right here.
probably was not personally responsible for all of the discoveries that he was accredited for. He had a team of scientists. He had a laboratory that worked for him, and it was not unlike IBM or Google would be today. If someone underneath Larry Schmidt, I think is the Google guy, right? If somebody underneath him discovers something really cool, well, he just might take credit for it and say, "Hey, that was pretty cool, and I'm the guy responsible for that." So I think Edison did a lot of that sort of thing, whereas Tesla was he was just an auteur. He was driven by the technology, by the knowledge, more so than Edison. I think Edison liked the money. He liked the patents and the money and the notoriety, whereas Tesla is more what I would see as sort of a pure scientific intellect.
So then, oh, wait a minute. Now, this just popped into my head because that's what happens with me. Just bam, there it is. What about Einstein? Did he not, by what did he not help create the atomic bomb?
Oh yes, very
Mm,
much so.
mm. How did that help the betterment of mankind?
Well, it didn't. However, the
There you go.
atomic bomb also the same knowledge, and in fact, very famously, Einstein wrote to Roosevelt, or maybe it was Truman, wrote to Truman saying that he in fact was in favor of the nuclear bomb. And Einstein was Jewish, and he was in favor of it because he feared that the Nazis would get a nuclear bomb first. So I think he was driven uh, by a lot of things to support the nuclear bomb. But also nuclear power came out of that same vein of knowledge. Now that also gets a bad rap, but I personally think that it should be deeply re-examined. If we were a more nuclear-oriented nation, we'd be much better off in our power, for our power needs.